Imagine a peaceful village on the outskirts of Bavaria, where the air is crisp and fresh, and the streets are lined with charming houses. Nestled between towering trees and winding paths, the village gives off the warmth of a place untouched by time. The locals speak of the beauty of the surrounding forest, an ancient expanse of land filled with towering oak trees and tangled brush, a place where the sun barely touches the forest floor due to the thick canopy above. The forest is a mysterious place, full of secrets, and yet, to the villagers, it is as familiar as the back of their hands. But there is a dark side to this beauty, a side that few dare to speak of openly. The forest has a reputation, one that keeps even the bravest of villagers at bay when night falls. They say the forest comes alive at night. There are whispers of strange noises, footsteps that seem to echo in the distance, faint calls that sound like people in need of help. But when you search for the source, there is nothing but the oppressive silence of the trees. The thick fog that rolls in during the early evening adds to the sense of dread, wrapping everything in a shroud of white mystery. The fog is said to make everything seem distant, as if the forest itself is trying to hide its true nature, to keep something hidden from those who dare to look too closely. It wasn't always this way. In the days before the eerie stories began to spread, the forest was just a forest. People would walk its paths, pick mushrooms, and hunt game. But that all changed in the summer of 2003. A group of hikers, experienced and well-prepared, decided to venture deep into the forest for a weekend excursion. They were confident they knew the land well. But the forest, as the locals had warned, does not give up its secrets easily. The group, 3 men and 2 women, packed their tents, food, and camping gear, setting off into the dense woods. They had no idea they were walking towards something that would haunt the village for years to come. The hikers didn't make it back. When the village heard that they had not returned by the evening of the second day, the authorities were notified. A search party was quickly organized, and the villagers gathered at the edge of the forest, nervously waiting for any sign of the hikers. The air was thick with tension as the searchers combed through the woods, calling out for the missing hikers. They had their doubts, but no one expected to find what they did. The searchers found the hikers' campsite, but it was abandoned. Tents were still standing, backpacks neatly placed beside them, food left half-eaten. The hikers had vanished without a trace, leaving everything behind. It was as though they had simply disappeared into thin air. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no indication that they had been attacked by any wild animals. The campsite seemed untouched, as if they had just walked off into the forest and forgotten to return. But something didn't feel right. The eerie silence of the forest only added to the growing unease. It was as though the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. When the authorities arrived, they examined the area carefully, looking for any evidence that might explain the disappearance. But they found nothing that made sense. There were no broken branches, no signs of a fight, nothing to indicate that the hikers had been in any danger. The ground around the campsite was undisturbed, and yet the hikers were gone. As the search party ventured deeper into the forest, they began to find something strange: footprints. At first, they seemed like ordinary tracks left behind by the hikers. But as they followed the trail, something became clear. The footprints led deep into the heart of the forest, far beyond the area where the hikers had been camped. The footprints grew fainter the further they went, as if the hikers had become weaker with each step. But they were still there, clear enough to follow, and the searchers pressed on, hoping to find an answer. But the deeper they went, the stranger things became. The forest grew thicker, the trees closer together, and the air became colder. The footprints seemed to lead to a place that no one had ever been before, a place that even the most experienced hikers avoided. And then, just like that, the trail stopped. There were no more footprints, no more signs of where the hikers had gone. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. The authorities scoured the forest for days, but they found no trace of the hikers, no bodies, no signs of struggle, nothing. The mystery of their disappearance remained unsolved. The forest had taken them, and it was clear that it would never give them back. The villagers, already superstitious, began to whisper among themselves. They spoke of the midnight wanderers, the restless spirits of those who had gotten lost in the forest and were doomed to wander it forever. Some said that the forest itself was alive, feeding on the souls of those who entered and never returned. Others believed that the hikers had stumbled upon something far worse than the forest itself, something ancient and dark that had claimed them. For years, the forest remained undisturbed, a silent witness to the horror that had unfolded. The village settled back into its quiet rhythm, but the memory of the hikers haunted them. Every time someone ventured into the woods, they couldn't help but wonder, would they be the next to disappear? And as the years passed, the eerie tales of the midnight wanderers grew stronger. People spoke of strange sounds at night, the eerie glow that sometimes appeared between the trees, and the unsettling feeling that someone was watching from the shadows. A forest had claimed its first victims in 2003, and it wouldn't be long before it would claim others. But the most chilling part of the story came one foggy night several years later, when a lone traveler, a man who had heard the tales of the haunted forest, decided to test the legends for himself. He believed in nothing beyond reason, convinced that the stories were mere superstition. He set off, determined to walk through the forest and disprove the rumors once and for all. He didn't come back either. His disappearance was just the beginning of something much darker. The forest had grown bolder, and its appetite was far from satisfied. The village would never be the same again. The villagers have always whispered about the midnight wanderers. It's a tale passed down through generations, shared in hushed voices around fires or in the quiet corners of homes, always with a sense of unease that chills the bones. No one speaks of them without looking over their shoulders, as if simply mentioning the name might summon them. They say the forest is cursed, that something ancient and malevolent lives within its depths, a presence that claims the souls of those who enter and never return. The midnight wanderers are the proof of this curse, a reminder of the forest's insatiable hunger. The wanderers aren't like the spirits or ghosts people talk about in other parts of the world. These aren't restless souls trapped between worlds, searching for closure or redemption. No, the midnight wanderers are something far worse. They are the souls of those who ventured too deep into the forest, lost their way, and were claimed by its dark force. These are the souls of travelers, hikers, wanderers, and even the curious who thought they could brave the forest, only to be consumed by it. And they don't simply vanish into thin air. Their presence is felt. They linger. The villagers say that the forest itself is alive in a way that defies understanding. It is not just a collection of trees, rocks, and earth. It breathes, shifts, and thrives on the energy of those who enter. The forest has its own rhythm, its own hunger, and it feeds off the fear, confusion, and hopelessness of its victims. The deeper you go, the more you can feel it, like something is watching, always just out of sight. And when you stray too far, when the trees close in around you, that is when the forest claims you, taking you into its heart and transforming you into one of its own. The midnight wanderers are the forest's way of keeping track of those it has claimed. Every midnight, they rise from the shadows, their forms faint and glowing, drifting silently through the trees. It is said that if you are unlucky enough to stumble upon them, you will see their eyes, empty, cold, and lifeless. There is no trace of humanity left in them. They do not speak, nor do they ask for help. They are not lost, for they are the lost ones. They don't seek rest, nor do they seek redemption. They only seek one thing: to claim others, to add to their number, to drag you into the forest and make you one of them. First time someone in the village spoke of the midnight wanderers, it was an old man named Franz who lived on the edge of town. His hair was white as snow, and his eyes always seemed to be looking into the distance, as though he were staring at something no one else could see. Franz had lived through many winters and had seen more of the forest than anyone else in the village. He had grown up playing in the woods, running through the trees as a child, never fearing the dark. But that all changed one fateful night when he was a young man. It was a night like any other. Franz and a group of his friends had ventured deep into the forest, drawn by the thrill of the unknown. They had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. But like most young men, they thought they were invincible, that the stories were just that, stories. They didn't believe in ghosts or curses. But that night, something changed. It was as if the forest had awakened, and it was no longer content with simply being a backdrop to the lives of the villagers. The trees seemed to shift. The shadows lengthened unnaturally, and the wind whispered in a way that didn't seem quite right. Franz felt a growing sense of unease as they walked deeper into the woods. He could hear the others laughing, talking, but their voices were starting to sound distant, as though the forest was pulling them apart, separating them from the world they knew. The deeper they went, the more the air thickened with a sense of dread. Then, as they ventured further, Franz noticed something strange. The forest had gone silent. The usual sounds, the rustling of leaves, the calls of animals, had ceased completely. And then, in the distance, he saw it, a faint glow between the trees, like a will-o'-the-wisp flickering in the night. His friends, still oblivious to the change in the atmosphere, called out to him, urging him to keep up. But Franz couldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, staring at the glow, something in his chest tightening with fear. Before he could react, the glow grew brighter, and from the shadows emerged figures, shapes that seemed almost human, but were wrong in every way. Their bodies were faint, translucent, as if they were made of smoke, but their eyes were like black pits, empty and hollow, staring directly into Franz's soul. He felt a chill run through his body, a bone-deep cold that seemed to freeze him in place. They moved towards him, slow and deliberate, their feet never touching the ground, as if they were floating just above it. Franz tried to call out to his friends, but his voice caught in his throat. He turned to run, but his legs wouldn't move. His heart pounded in his chest, and the forest seemed to close in around him, as though the trees themselves were trying to trap him. The figures, what he now realized were the midnight wanderers, grew closer, their empty eyes never leaving his. He could feel their cold gaze on him, and the terror that gripped him was overwhelming. They were not here to help him. They were here to take him. In a panic, Franz tore himself free from whatever invisible force had held him, and he ran. He ran like he had never run before, through the trees, dodging branches and roots, the sound of his pounding heart deafening in his ears. But no matter how fast he ran, no matter how far he pushed himself, he couldn't escape the forest. It was as if the very earth was against him, pulling him back into its dark embrace. When Franz finally stumbled back into the village, his clothes were torn, his face pale, and his eyes wide with terror. He couldn't speak for hours, his mind unable to process what had happened. And when he finally did speak, it wasn't just the tale of his narrow escape that haunted him. It was the knowledge that he had seen something far worse, something more terrifying than any monster or ghost. He had seen the midnight wanderers, and he had felt their cold touch. After that night, Franz never spoke of the forest again. He never went near its borders. He never even looked at the trees without feeling a cold shiver crawl down his spine. But the stories didn't stop. The midnight wanderers continued to haunt the villagers, appearing in the darkest hours of the night, dragging their victims into the woods to join their endless parade. The forest had claimed Franz's soul in a way he could never explain, and it would claim others too, as it always had, as it always would. The midnight wanderers would never rest, for the forest itself never did. And so, the legend lives on. It was a crisp evening in late autumn when Emma and Mark set off into the forest. The golden light of the setting sun was slowly fading, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The trees, thick with age, stood tall around them, their branches swaying lightly in the cool breeze. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves, the scent of autumn all around them. The couple had heard the rumors, of course. Every villager had warned them not to go too far into the forest after dark. They spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting nervously when the topic came up. But Emma and Mark were young and in love, their heads full of adventure. They brushed aside the warnings, dismissing them as mere superstition. Just some old folk tales, Mark had said, grinning at Emma as they walked, hand in hand, into the heart of the forest. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the sound of their footsteps crunched over the fallen leaves. The forest seemed almost magical in the twilight, with the light filtering through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the ground. They spoke in cheerful voices, laughing about silly things, exchanging stories and jokes. The further they walked, the more the forest seemed to embrace them. But as the last of the daylight faded, an unsettling feeling began to creep into the air. The temperature dropped suddenly. The warmth of the afternoon replaced by an icy chill that wrapped itself around them. The sudden cold made Emma shiver, pulling her jacket tighter around her body, and Mark glanced at her with a concerned frown. "Maybe we should head back," Emma suggested, her voice quieter now, as if the chill in the air had affected her mood as well. But Mark laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, don't tell me you're getting scared already. It's just a little cold, that's all." He reached out, taking her hand, and led her deeper into the forest, past the twisted trunks of ancient oaks and the thick underbrush that seemed to close in on them with every step. As they walked further into the woods, the atmosphere shifted. The sounds of nature that had accompanied them, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of birds, had disappeared, leaving behind an eerie silence. It was as though the forest itself had fallen still, holding its breath. The only sound left was the soft crunch of their footsteps, the rhythmic beat of their hearts as they moved along. The air felt thick, and every so often, Emma would glance over her shoulder, feeling as though something was watching them from the shadows. Though whenever she turned, she saw nothing. "I don't like this," she muttered, but Mark merely smiled. "It's just the forest. You're being paranoid." But even Mark couldn't deny the change in the air. There was something unnatural about it. something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. But he wasn't about to admit it. Not with Emma by his side, not when he was supposed to be the brave one. They continued walking, the path growing narrower as they went deeper into the heart of the forest. The moon had risen by this time, casting an eerie glow through the thick canopy, but its light barely reached the ground. The trees were too dense, the darkness too thick. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, something caught their attention. It was faint at first, barely noticeable against the dark backdrop of the forest, but it was there, a strange glow, flickering between the trees, barely visible through the thickets. Emma stopped in her tracks, squinting into the darkness. Mark turned to look, his face frowning with confusion. "Do you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded slowly, his curiosity piqued. "Yeah, what is that? Is it some kind of animal or something?" They stood in silence, watching the glow for a moment, unsure of what it was. It pulsed softly, a pale, ethereal light that seemed to beckon them closer. Emma took a cautious step forward, and Mark followed her, intrigued but also a little uneasy. The further they went, the brighter the glow became. The air grew colder still, the temperature dropping as if a winter frost had settled over the entire forest. The wind, which had been rustling the leaves just moments before, had fallen silent. "Maybe we should turn back," Emma said again, her voice trembling now. Before Mark could respond, they heard it, a faint sound, whispers almost too soft to make out, carried on the wind. It sounded like distant voices, but there was something strange about them, as though they were coming from all directions at once. The words were unclear at first, but as they strained to listen, the whispers became more distinct. "Help. Please." The words were barely audible, and yet they both heard them as if the forest itself was speaking. The voice was desperate, tinged with fear, and it seemed to come from deep within the forest. Emma's heart skipped a beat, and she took a step back, pulling Mark's arm. "Did you hear that?" she gasped, her breath coming out in shallow gasps. Mark nodded, his face pale now, and he glanced around nervously, looking for the source of the voice. The glow had grown brighter, casting an eerie light around them. Emma's heart raced, and she turned to Mark, her eyes wide with panic. "We need to go, now!" But it was too late. As Emma grabbed Mark's arm to pull him away, she froze. The figures had appeared, pale, glowing shapes drifting silently between the trees. They were tall, their bodies translucent, their movements unnaturally slow. They moved aimlessly, without purpose, their eyes empty, hollow sockets that stared into the darkness. Mark, we need to leave," Emma whispered, but her voice was shaky, filled with terror. She could feel her legs trembling beneath her, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to scream, but the words wouldn't come. Mark stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the figures. He could feel a strange pull, as though something was drawing him in, urging him to approach the glowing shapes. He reached out, mesmerized, but Emma grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "Mark, no," she screamed. But he didn't listen. His eyes were vacant, his face pale. as though the figures had taken hold of him. Emma's blood ran cold as she watched him step forward, his feet moving of their own accord. The pale figures continued to drift through the trees, unblinking, as though they hadn't heard Emma's cries. Before she could stop him, Mark was gone, disappearing into the shadows, his footsteps barely audible as he walked away from her. Emma turned, panic surging through her, but when she looked down, she saw it. A single boot print left in the dirt, the only trace of him remaining. "Mark!" she cried out, but there was no answer. No sound at all, except for the whispering voices that seemed to surround her now, echoing from every corner of the forest. The glow had faded, and the figures had vanished, leaving only the eerie silence behind them. Emma stood alone in the dark, her heart racing, the cold air biting at her skin. She had no idea what had just happened, but one thing was certain. Mark was gone, and the forest had claimed him. And now, it was coming for her. The sun had just begun to rise when Emma stumbled out of the forest, her clothes torn and dirty, her face pale with fear. Her steps were unsteady, her eyes wide with terror, as if she had seen something so horrible that it had shattered her mind. She was barely able to form coherent thoughts, and her mind was a blur of fragmented memories, glowing figures, the whispering voices, Mark's disappearance. But one thing was clear to her. Mark was still out there, somewhere in the woods, and she had to find him. She didn't know how she had escaped the forest, but she knew it wasn't over. The forest hadn't let go of her, and it wasn't done with Mark. When the villagers found her, they were shocked. No one had expected her to return. After all, no one ever did. They immediately called for the village doctor, but Emma couldn't remember much. She couldn't explain what had happened during the night, and she certainly couldn't explain the things she had seen or heard. The whispers in the wind, the strange figures she had followed, the feeling that something had been watching her. None of it made sense. But she knew one thing. The forest had claimed Mark, and it was only a matter of time before it took her too. Emma was taken to the village inn, where the elders gathered to discuss what had happened. The village was small, isolated, and steeped in old traditions and beliefs. The elders were the keepers of the village's history, the ones who knew the old stories, the ones who had lived through the years of whispered warnings about the forest. They had seen things, heard things, things that most of the younger villagers had dismissed as superstition. But now, Emma's experience was forcing them to reconsider. It wasn't long before they decided to take Emma to the edge of the forest, to the place where the trees grew thickest, where the village stopped and the wild woods began. There, they spoke to her of a hidden trail, a path that could lead someone out of the forest. It was a trail that no one had ever found, a path that only those who truly understood the forest could see. The elders spoke of the trail with reverence, their faces shadowed with fear. "The trail is real, Emma," said one of the elders, his voice deep and gravelly. "But it is not meant for everyone. It is a path that reveals itself only to those who the forest allows. And once you follow it, there is no turning back." Emma listened intently, her heart heavy with the burden of the truth they were offering her. She had to find this trail. She had to find a way to escape. The thought of returning to the forest, of searching for Mark in the same cursed woods that had taken him, terrified her. But she knew she had no choice. She had to try. "The forest is alive, Emma," another elder said, his voice trembling slightly. "It watches, it listens, and it does not let go easily. The trail is the only way out, but many have tried and failed. Those who seek it are often lost forever." The elder's words hung in the air, thick with the weight of their meaning. Emma's heart sank as she thought of Mark, lost, trapped in the forest. She couldn't bear the thought of him still out there, wandering, waiting for her to find him. She had to find the trail. She had to find a way to get him back. "Why do you speak of it so fearfully?" Emma asked, her voice strained with desperation. "If it's the only way to escape, why hasn't anyone followed it?" The elder paused, his face grim. "Because no one has ever successfully followed it. The trail is elusive, and the forest does not want anyone to leave. It takes its victims, and it keeps them. Some say the trail leads you in circles, taking you deeper into the forest, making you believe you're going somewhere, when in truth, you're only being drawn further in. Others claim the path disappears altogether, leaving those who seek it lost forever." Emma swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. She had to be strong for Mark. She couldn't let fear stop her. She had to find him. She had to believe there was a way out. "Can you show me the way?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The elder shook his head slowly. "We can't. The trail reveals itself only to those the forest chooses. No one can force it to appear. But we can tell you this. When you enter, you must be ready to face whatever comes. The forest will test you, and if you're not strong enough, it will take you too." Emma nodded, her resolve hardening. She knew what she had to do. She had to find the trail. She had to face whatever lay ahead. The thought of Mark, still trapped in the woods, somewhere between life and death, kept her going. She couldn't let him stay there. She wouldn't let the forest claim him. The elder's warning echoed in her mind as she walked toward the forest's edge. The trees loomed before her, thick and dark, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The path ahead seemed to vanish into the shadows, but Emma could feel it. Something calling to her, something pulling her forward. As she stepped into the forest, she felt the air grow colder. The silence pressed in on her, thick and suffocating. She could almost hear the whispers again, faint and distant, but no longer comforting. They were warnings now. The forest was alive, and it was watching her. She walked deeper into the woods, the path beneath her feet uneven and treacherous. She tried not to let the fear creep into her thoughts, tried to focus on the path ahead, but every rustle in the underbrush, every crack of a twig, made her heart race. She had no idea what she was walking into. For hours, Emma wandered, searching for any sign of the hidden path. The trees seemed to close in around her, and the deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to shift. The path would suddenly fork, leading her in one direction, only to circle back on itself. It felt as if the forest itself were playing tricks on her, trying to mislead her, to make her lose her way. As night fell, the forest grew even darker, the shadows thick and suffocating. She could barely see the ground beneath her feet, and every step seemed to echo in the silence. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth with no way out. But then, as the moon rose high in the sky, something changed. The air grew warmer, and a soft glow appeared in the distance. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. There, just ahead, was a faint light, pulsing gently through the trees. It was the trail. She knew it was. She could feel it in her bones. The forest had given her a sign. With newfound hope, Emma pushed forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The path was there, hidden in plain sight. The forest had chosen her. She was on the trail now, and there was no turning back. But as she followed the glow, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The whispers had started again, faint at first, but growing louder. The forest was not done with her yet. And whatever lay at the end of this trail, it was waiting for her. This chapter deepens Emma's journey into the forest as she begins to uncover the mysteries surrounding the hidden trail. It creates a tense atmosphere filled with uncertainty and fear as Emma faces the daunting reality of navigating the forest's twisted paths and the eerie presence that watches her every move. Days passed, and Emma's mind couldn't escape the image of Mark's terrified face. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, lost, alone, and trapped somewhere in the darkness of the forest. It wasn't just his face she saw. It was the desperate look in his eyes, the way he had turned to her and silently begged for help. The forest had taken him, she knew it, and it wasn't done with him yet. It had to be her. She couldn't let him stay there, alone in that cursed place. She had to go back. She had to bring him home, no matter the cost. The thought of him still wandering out there, somewhere in the thick, oppressive woods, gnawed at her every waking moment. There was no other option. If she didn't go, who would? But Emma wasn't alone in her determination. The villagers, too, were affected by the haunting events. Though many of them had heard the warnings, seen the disappearances, and felt the unspoken dread that hung over the forest, there were some who were willing to help her. She wasn't sure if they were motivated by guilt, fear, or the same sense of obligation that plagued her. Whatever the reason, Emma knew she couldn't do it alone. The forest was too vast, too dangerous. She needed others to help, even if they were just there for moral support. That night, a small group of villagers gathered at the edge of the forest, their faces set with grim determination. Emma had spoken to them earlier, pleading for their help. Some had hesitated, knowing full well the risks they were about to face. But they couldn't ignore Emma's plea, her desperation and resolve. She had become the voice of all those who had lost loved ones in the forest. They didn't want her to become another victim, another soul claimed by the dark trees. Each villager carried a flashlight, and some even brought makeshift weapons. Though Emma knew well enough that nothing in this forest could be fought off with a mere stick or a flickering light. The air felt different as they stepped into the forest. It was thicker, heavier, as if the trees themselves were closing in around them. The usual sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of owls, had gone silent. It was as though the forest knew they were coming, as though it was waiting for them, anticipating their every move. The cold, sharp air clung to their skin, and Emma could see her breath misting in front of her, though it was far too warm for it to be natural. She felt the weight of the forest pressing on her chest, suffocating her with every step. As they ventured deeper, the forest grew darker. The trees loomed like sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting into eerie shapes, casting long shadows on the ground. The path, if it could even be called that, was barely visible, overgrown with thick underbrush and tangled vines. The farther they went, the less the light from their flashlights seemed to penetrate the darkness. The beams bounced off the trees, creating flickering shadows that seemed to move with them, making it feel as though they were being followed. Emma could feel the forest closing in, its grip tightening around her. After what felt like an eternity of walking in silence, they reached the spot where Emma had last seen Mark. The place where the eerie glow had appeared. The place where she had felt the presence of the midnight wanderers. It was as if time had stood still. The glow, faint at first, now flickered between the trees, casting an unsettling pale light across the ground. The same cold, otherworldly feeling hung in the air. The hairs on the back of Emma's neck stood on end, and she could feel the weight of the forest's watchful eyes upon them. The weight of the forest's watchful eyes upon them, and that's now no turning back. As they stood there, the whispering voices returned. At first, they were faint, barely audible over the rustling of the wind, but then they grew louder, more distinct. The words, though muffled, sent a chill through Emma's spine. "Help us." The voice was soft, but the urgency behind it was clear. It was as if someone was pleading for help from all around them, but there was no one in sight. The sound seemed to come from the trees themselves, or perhaps from the earth beneath their feet. It was impossible to tell. Mark was out there. She had to find him. Without another word, Emma continued on, walking through the thickening shadows, her flashlight flickering as the air grew colder. The others followed, albeit reluctantly, their footsteps slow and unsure. Each of them carried their own fear, but Emma's determination was stronger. She couldn't stop now. She had to find Mark. She had to save him. The trees grew closer as they pushed forward, and the whispering voices began to fill the air, becoming louder with each step. Emma could hear them clearly now, the haunting murmurs from every direction. But there was no sign of anyone. It was as if the forest itself was speaking to them, urging them to continue deeper into its heart. The path was barely discernible, the forest floor covered with loose branches, rocks, and thick undergrowth. It seemed like the further they went, the more the path disappeared, as though the forest was conspiring to make them lose their way. And in the distance, Emma saw it. A figure. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the light, but as she got closer, she realized it was Mark. Her heart leaped in her chest. She ran toward him, calling his name, but as she drew closer, she saw that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't the Mark she knew. This figure was pale, its face twisted in a grotesque expression of agony. His eyes, once full of life, were empty, black pits of nothingness. His skin seemed stretched tight, like it no longer fit his bones. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, motionless, as though he had been waiting for her. Emma froze in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. "Mark?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out to him, her hand shaking, but he didn't respond. It was as if he didn't even see her. He was there, but he wasn't really there. He was a shell, an empty vessel caught in the grip of the forest. Her heart twisted in her chest. She wanted to run to him, to pull him into her arms, and beg him to come back. But something held her in place. She could feel the presence of the forest around her, thick and heavy, as though it were closing in on her, suffocating her. The others were still behind her, too afraid to move, their faces pale and filled with fear. "Mark," Emma whispered again, her voice breaking, but he didn't respond. He stood there, unmoving, as though he were waiting for something she couldn't see, something that was far beyond her understanding. The moment stretched on, and Emma could feel her strength waning. She took a step forward, but just as she did, the ground beneath her feet shifted. A low rumble echoed through the trees, and the air seemed to thicken, becoming even colder. It was as if the forest itself was alive, reacting to her presence. The whispers grew louder, now almost deafening, and Emma could feel the pressure building in her chest. She turned to look at the others, but they were all frozen, their faces stricken with fear. It was clear that no one else could see what she saw. And then, the figure of Mark began to fade, as though he were never there to begin with. The pale, tortured face melted into the shadows, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Emma's heart sank, and before she could react, the forest swallowed him whole. She was alone again. The forest had taken him, just as it had taken so many others. Emma's heart was pounding as she saw Mark standing there, motionless, a figure shrouded in the unnatural glow of the forest. Her legs trembled beneath her. But she pushed forward, driven by the overwhelming desire to reach him, to save him. She called his name again, louder this time, her voice breaking as she stepped closer. "Mark!" The word felt hollow in the thick, heavy air, as though it couldn't escape her chest fast enough. But as she closed the distance between them, something shifted inside her. It was a subtle change, but one that hit her like a wave crashing against the shore. The closer she got, the more she realized it wasn't him. The face, the features, the eyes that had once been full of warmth and life. Now they were empty, black voids. His expression was twisted, but not in the way she had expected. His mouth was slightly open, his jaw slack, but there was no recognition in his gaze, no spark of the man she had loved. She could see it clearly now. He was not Mark. He was another wanderer, another lost soul, another victim of the forest's insidious curse. Her breath caught in her throat, and a chill washed over her. The weight of the realization hit her all at once. The forest had claimed him, the same way it had claimed others before him. She had been chasing a ghost, a faded version of the person she loved, a shell of the man who had once been so full of life. But that man was gone, and what remained was just another soul trapped in the endless, suffocating darkness of the haunted forest. Emma froze, her body trembling as she took a step back. She reached out to him, her hand shaking as she tried to touch his arm. But before she could make contact, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The earth cracked open with a deafening sound, like the forest itself was tearing apart, and a sharp, jarring pull tugged at her. She stumbled forward, her legs giving way beneath her, as if the very earth had decided it was time for her to join the other lost souls. A scream tore from her lips as she felt herself being drawn into the gaping hole in the ground. Her body screamed, every fiber of her being resisting. But her mind was frozen, paralyzed by the realization that she had been wrong. The forest wasn't just a place. It wasn't just a patch of land filled with trees and earth. It was something far more insidious, far more powerful. It was alive, a sentient entity that consumed everything in its path, feeding on the fear, confusion, and despair of those who entered its grasp. As the ground continued to crumble beneath her, Emma felt the darkness pulling her down. The whispers, the same whispers that had haunted her every step since she entered the forest, grew louder, filling her mind, suffocating her thoughts. They were voices, souls lost in the forest, their voices stretched thin with agony. They called out to her, beckoning her into the abyss. "Help us! Help us!" The words were not for her. They were not meant for salvation. No, they were a warning, a promise that once the forest had taken you, it never let go. And now, Emma understood. She understood the true horror of the midnight wanderers. They weren't just lost souls. They were part of the forest itself. They were the forest's prisoners, forced to wander in an endless loop of torment, unable to escape. And now, she was becoming one of them. The coal grew stronger, the force of the earth's grip tightening around her, dragging her deeper into the ground. She could feel the soil beneath her, damp and cold, seeping into her clothes, into her skin. Her body began to fade, her limbs growing heavier, as though the weight of the forest itself was pressing down on her. Her thoughts were slipping away, her connection to reality growing weaker by the second. She knew she wasn't going to survive this. She wasn't going to escape. The forest had already claimed her. The villagers who had followed her were nowhere to be found. She had seen them at the edge of the forest, standing in shock, frozen by the overwhelming terror that gripped their hearts. But now, they were gone. Had they turned back? Had they fled in fear? Or had the forest claimed them as well? She couldn't be sure. The forest didn't allow for certainty. It took everything. People, memories, hopes, and left only the lingering sense of loss. The whispers continued swirling around her, becoming a cacophony of desperate, hollow voices. Emma felt her body start to fade, the pull of the earth growing stronger with every passing second. Her heart raced, the final moments of her life flashing before her eyes. She wanted to scream, to fight, to escape, but there was nothing left to fight with. The darkness had consumed her, and she was powerless to stop it. As the final remnants of her consciousness slipped away, Emma's thoughts turned to Mark. Was he still out there, trapped like she was? Had he become one of them, a part of the forest's curse? She couldn't bear to think about it, but her heart ached with the knowledge that she would never see him again, that she would never find him. She had failed him. But then something shifted. A flicker of light in the distance, a distant memory of something warm, something alive. Emma could feel herself being pulled toward it, a faint, glowing hope in the midst of the overwhelming darkness. It was faint, like a whisper in the wind, but it was there. It was the last piece of her humanity, the last piece of her spirit that wasn't ready to fade into the nothingness of the forest. She understood then. She understood what she had to do. The forest may have taken her body, but it wouldn't take her soul. Not yet. Not without a fight. As her body continued to sink into the earth, Emma's last words escaped her lips, barely a whisper in the darkness. The forest never lets go. And just like that, the light flickered, the darkness consumed her, and Emma vanished into the depths of the haunted forest of Bavaria, joining the midnight wanderers, another lost soul, another prisoner of the forest's endless hunger.